I'm here with my friend John Currin, who's also a board member of Octavian, and is, I think it's a non-controversial statement to say that he's one of the most important contemporary artists working today. His work is in countless museums, including MoMA, the Whitney, MoCA LA, Walker, the Tate, Pompidou, etc. I wanted to talk to John today about a project he did with us in the spirit of the European magazines of the 20s through the 50s, where there was all kinds of collaboration between artists and writers and creative people of all sorts. We've tried to have projects like that. There is, as I mentioned earlier, and John, you weren't here when I quoted Harold Bloom, who said, he said, "Information is endlessly available to us. Where shall wisdom become? Where shall we find wisdom?" So John worked on a project that was related to an interview that we did with Harold Bloom, who unfortunately passed away last week. And I know was looking forward to actually, he was too sick to attend, but to hearing this conversation. And I actually, with my son Asher, we personally brought the copies when they got hot off the press up to him, and I know he was a big fan of your work and was really taken with it. And he had a really wonderful moment where he kind of was studying the painting. And the interview was about the play Othello. Bloom had just written a book on Iago, who's the villain. He had a great line in our interview where he said, it's Othello's tragedy, but it's Iago's play. So he felt Iago was this very important character. And as part of that, I asked John if he would do some illustration for the interview. So I promised him, and when we open up for questions, he's not an expert, nor am I, on Othello or Shakespeare. But maybe we could put the image up that he did for us. So I guess my first question, John, is, so this is of Desdemona. Why did you pick Desdemona as the character?
As opposed to Iago or
anybody?
Well, I might consider Iago now, but I go from male mode to female mode and back, but I spend much more time in female mode. So I had this painting going for a while when you contacted me, and it just let me channel it into Desdemona. I like those characters anyway. This kind of to kind of refer to the last talk, optimistic, pessimistic, naive, jaded kind of figures.
And so, is it finished? I know you were at one point were still kind of working on it.
It felt good to have that kind of ridiculous hair for the, almost like she's gone to college and come back and with an ill-advised style, and it kind of, I thought, went nicely with this, in my mind, kind of Venetian wallpaper or whatever behind her. But I think I might. I think I might.
I know there was some talk about a necklace at one point.
I think I might, in the end, doll it up a whole lot.
Right, okay. Is this a real model, or is it a?
It's a no. It's a Sears catalog model that I then made a small etching of, and then I made the painting from the etching. And then, I have people stand there and I get their eyes and that kind of thing.
And how did you kind of think about Othello for yourself with this? I mean, did you?
Well, I didn't. I didn't remember anything about it except for Laurence Olivier, and that kind of. But on your recommendation, I watched the Orson Welles production, and I was, I think it was amazing, and I was very glad to be thinking about Desdemona. That is, I don't claim to have resonance in Renaissance culture, but it seemed like a character I could understand.
There's an amazing, I don't know if the story that Wells, when he was making Othello, kept running out of money, and he would go and do like horrible Hollywood movies to make money and then finish the movie. And we have a friend, someone who flew in from Morocco here. There's a fort in Essaouira where there's a scene where there's a punch, and the time between when they filmed the punch and when they connected was 2 years in separation.
Sounds like my paintings, actually.
Yeah. So how long do you usually spend on a painting?
This one was started in, a year, easily a year and a half ago, I guess. So they'll get somewhere, they'll sit there, I'll work on other things, and then a little thing will happen, and then I have a show coming up, and I'll finish it for that. So it really doesn't take that long to paint something. You know what I mean? It's not like I'm with a one-hair brush, going. It's you kind of make up your mind, and ideally it takes 20 minutes to make something nice. So it doesn't take long to paint. To paint well, it takes a long time to paint badly. But
do you paint over and over the picture, or
if I painted it, if I kept covering the surface, it would die. Right. So there are artists that can work that way, but I'm not one of them.
So I mean, to me, there was something about the Bloom interview. I mean, to me, having John, Shakespeare, and Harold Bloom in the same kind of 2 pages was amazing. And your work is. I don't know if the Renaissance is precisely the right moment you're interested in, but obviously I know you have a very deep interest and knowledge of old masters. To keep with, I guess, the Harold Bloom theme, he wrote a book. I guess one of his famous early books was The Anxiety of Influence, which was about poetry, but it talked about the dialogue between one generation to the other, right, and the continuation of art history. So I'm curious. I mean, maybe anxiety is the wrong word, but who are do you view as your
Well, I took it
influences?
From Bloom. It's more like the hostility.
That you want to
the resentment of influence, and I think one thing I've noticed about myself is I like the second level of artist for that reason. I like the great ones are just too difficult they're too hot, and so I'm a big fan of kind of minor paintings from any period, because you can take things from those, and you can steal from them and or be influenced by them. But the great ones, I find even the technique is particular to the personality of the artist and the genius of the artist, and it's just hard to, it looks like crap in your work, like I'm reminded of art school. People would glaze, they'd have transparent reds, and it looks awful, and to this day I can't really do a transparent red, and it's particular to. It's a little bit like when people would talk about Duchamp and explain the principles behind The Bride and the Bachelors and all that kind of thing. And I just thought it's pointless, because it's all has to do with his sense of humor. And same with Warhol. The attitude has to do with it's awful in anyone else as a principle. And I think that carries over to techniques sometime with old masters. I've always liked Rococo art because of its because on the surface it's insincere, it's fluttery, it's very surfacey painting, and therefore I think much more accessible to a 21st century artist.
Do you have any favorite artists of old masters?
Oh yeah, I mean Botticelli. Oh God, all the Venetians, Velázquez, Caravaggio, Poussin. But really, for me, the bridge to the old masters for me has always been Courbet, because there's a kind of like a sense of someone teaching themselves how to look at the old masters, and then I can see it then from my perch. In the same way that, say, Balthus, I always thought was a way for people to look at Courbet, was a kind of a stepping stone to Courbet.
Do you think people will look back at this time? I mean, a lot of art, and I guess this is always true, but a lot of art right now seems to be very political in some way, shape, or form, or there's sort of a movement away from a premium on technique, which is obviously not the case with your work. I mean, how do you think people will look at this period of time culturally, and particularly in visual arts? Do you think we're going through an important period, or obviously there'll be some important artists, but
I think most things are ugly and stupid, but I mean, but that's probably been the case.
Right, always.
And the ugly, stupid things get forgotten quickly. And on the other hand, I remember when I was much younger, I made this like timeline chart for myself of when everybody lived, when everybody was like 30 years old, And my God, it was like 1501 or 1505 was like 25 of these people, like from Bosch to Leonardo to, just they all showed up like an audience or something, and 20 of them, and then you go through like just nothing for a while, and then another big cohort pops up. So I don't know. I wanted to ask the previous speaker just how decadent society, if the perception of whether one's society is decadent or not is really necessarily pessimistic, and whether decadent societies are by nature optimistic or pessimistic about themselves. And I can't help but think that I live in a decadent society. On the other hand, I have 2 children who are diabetic. They would not be alive if I weren't living now. And I would not be wealthy. There are wonderful things about this society, and you can go into there's 150 art galleries to go into in New York City, that kind of thing. So I don't know about our time. I know that there's some wonderful artists, but it's very hard from this vantage point to compare it to
of course,
the past.
Does anybody have any questions for John?
Yes, Asher?
I was wondering, how does one construct the visage of Desdemona, but presented with a blank canvas? How do you bring to life such a timeless character, and I guess create the image that you have in your mind of Desdemona, or and try to reconcile that with, I guess, the general village?
Well, I'm a believer in imposing meanings on things that already exist, and I've always loved Courbet for that reason, of crazy interpretations of a genre picture, for instance. And I considered this. I consider the heads in Montgomery Ward catalogs as that's the blank canvas for me, not the actual blank canvas. So I often will take in my other work, will find an advertisement, find essentially a genre picture that someone else came up with for a different purpose, and start to impose my dreams on it and associations on it, and sort of make it part of my life as I paint it. And I think it's almost a superstitious, like talismanic idea, but I find it works for me. So if I started calling her Desdemona, she started to become Desdemona. was the way it is. The jowls, even. Like little things like that. What would Desdemona's earlobe look like? That kind of thing. So things that don't make any sense, but start to get you thinking subconsciously about it as well.
98% of Shakespeare's plays were, I think, renovations rather than original.
Yes, I noticed that.
Yes.
It's and many times,
including Othello,
great artists would find some little playing card or something, and they would adapt the scenario in that to something great. It's important to me that it be a meteorite that comes down and hits me rather than something I dig up.
Yeah. Yep.
So I have a sort of a vulgar question, which is we're at Sotheby's, the epicenter of the art market. Maybe Christie's might disagree. But I wanted to ask from the perspective of you as an artist working in this time of tremendous, unimaginable valuations of art, from certain old masters through to Jeff Koons. How does that affect your outlook as you go about creating? Does it have an impact on you? Do you simply ignore it? Or is it something that you have to respond to?
It doesn't, if people stop buying my work, it impacts me. But I don't mean that to sound flippant, but that's kind of the really, as far as like whether a price on a painting is obscene or is untoward, you think, well, I don't see anything wrong with a Van Gogh being the same price as an F-35. If I was a rebel in Yemen, I'd rather have the F-35 than the Van Gogh. But what I mean is, people. It's again what people are willing to pay, and I mean, if people are willing. I remember reading somewhere where actually furniture and tapestries were far more expensive than paintings. And in fact, for certain tapestries, cost as much as a battleship, as a fully rigged out battleship. And so it literally was like an F-35, and rather much more expensive than an F-35. So and also as someone who I basically benefit greatly from the hot art market. So I have no. From a selfish standpoint, it's fantastic. I suppose I could be burned, but I don't get feelings. I feel so inauthentic in so many other ways that is that's the least. Whether I deserve my money or not is way down the list. And I actually really mean that. I don't mean that as a joke. It's way down the list of, and I think at the center of my work is more of an existential inauthenticity, rather than wondering whether I deserve money or somebody else deserves money, or just the general kind of left viewpoint of being pissed at somebody else's fortune. So I don't know if that's an answer, but that's kind of great,
John, thank you. We have to let him get back to the studio, and also his wife is the show opening, so it must be beyond chaotic at home. So thank you for being here.
You're welcome.
Yeah.